This is Richie. So, one of the biggest complaints about dashboards is that you put in a lot of work to create something and then no one uses it. This is very frustrating both for the person who created the dashboard and the people who are supposed to be using it. So, today we're going to think about kind of the broader dashboard creation process. So it goes beyond just like, well, this is how I create a particular kind of plot. You also need to think about, well, what does your audience actually want, and how do you make sure that they are going to use it afterwards? So we're going to talk about how you create, best practices for how you create amazing dashboards. Now, I've got two fantastic guests for you. First up, we have Shannon Lindsay, who's a senior program manager for Microsoft Fabric at Microsoft. So, straight from the heart. And so, she's a business intelligence expert turned educator, and Shannon's helping build a community where both data professionals and newcomers can learn about Microsoft BI tools. And Shannon also writes about data at datawitches.com. Next up, we have Stephanie Bruno. So Stephanie is a business intelligence architect at iLink Digital. So she's got a decade of experience in creating BI solutions for clients, and in 2020, expertise in Fabric and Power BI earned her the prestigious Microsoft Data Platform MVP Award. With that, two amazing guests. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Richie. It is so great to be here. Thanks again for having us. So thank you everyone for joining. It looks like we have folks from all over the world. It is so great to have you here. We hope that you leave today's session armed with a little bit more knowledge and some tools to be able to build dashboards, like Richie said, that people will actually use. So before we get started, Stephanie, do you want to tell us just a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, yes. And also thank you, Richie, for that introduction. I think you kind of covered everything. Like Richie said, I'm a BI architect with iLink Digital. Very excited to be a data platform MVP. And I am here in very, very cold Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania today.
Stephanie, what's the temperature?
I think it is 7 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's pretty chilly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I am here in Santa Fe, New Mexico at 19 degrees Fahrenheit. So you win, or maybe you lose. Uh, but as Richie mentioned, I am on the product team at Microsoft, and I just moved into a role where I get to really work on building community. I was brought up in this data community, and now that's what I get to work on as my full-time job. So I'm super happy to be here. Let's jump in and talk about the agenda for today. We are going to take you through perhaps a little bit more than you expected, and we've only got an hour, so we will do our best to be concise. But we're going to start with talking about the significance of effective reporting. We're then going to go through kind of the cycle of what it is that you need to do to build effective reports. So it starts with requirements gathering. We then move on to data modeling, and that may be something you are doing or something you're working with a colleague on. We are then going to talk about the real meat of the presentation here today, which is applying design principles to your report. And we'll go through some examples specifically in Power BI so that you can get an idea of what that looks like. We're then going to talk about perhaps the most important part that a lot of us fail to do, which is to monitor our reports and iterate and improve them. And then we're going to try to open it up for some Q&A. So I'm going to jump right in. If folks have questions while we're talking, please drop them in the chat and we'll try to respond to them here live. So please drop your questions in the chat. The first thing I wanted to jump in, and Richie already mentioned this, so perhaps I can skip this slide, but Richie mentioned that a lot of the dashboards that we are building and delivering to our end users are not delivering actionable insights, 85%. So that means that only 15% of dashboards that we are building are being used. That is coming straight from Gartner. So that stat to me says we have a lot of room for improvement, and that's great. That's a big opportunity for us. We know that managers spend almost half of their time searching for data instead of using it to make decisions. I know in my own professional life, I see managers often continuing to make decisions based on their gut feel rather than making decisions based on data. And we, the people, those of us in this call today, have the power to change that. So how do we build these effective reports? What do good reports look like? What do they do? Good reports drive, oh, and actually, I'm going to pause for a moment. You may notice that I am interchanging the word dashboard and report. So I want to just clarify. In Power BI as a tool, what we typically build is called a report. This, to me, I feel like is colloquially known as a dashboard. Stephanie, do you agree with that?
Definitely agree. Even though within Power BI, a dashboard is technically something else. But yeah, I totally agree, kind of interchangeable.
Okay, thank you. So you'll notice we had dashboards in the title of the session, and now we're talking about reports. We're going to use those words interchangeably throughout the presentation. So effective reports drive business outcomes. That is what they're meant to do, right? They're meant to enhance clarity, not to leave people more confused. They're meant to increase adoption, and they're meant to deliver ROI. There's a reason why we build these reports. So
Wait, I thought the reason was just to say, wow, it's so pretty. Is that wrong?
well, we can
3D pie
build
charts?
reports.
Exploding pie charts? Not, no? Okay, I got that wrong. All right, good. I'm glad we're here today.
All right, so what we're talking about today, as we present, you're going to see us present it as kind of a flat line, but we wanted to just mention that it really is a complete cycle, and Stephanie's going to take us through the monitoring and iteration process at the end of the presentation. And we just wanted to show that it's a cycle, right? We gather our requirements, we do our data modeling, we build our report, we deploy it, we get feedback, we monitor, and we iterate. So it is a complete cycle. The way we're going to frame it today is in 4 main pieces, and that is requirements gathering, data modeling, design principles, and monitoring. So with that, we're going to jump right into pardon me, English is hard, requirements gathering. And I'm going to pass it over to Steph to take us through this.
Yes, thank you, Shannon. Excellent. So, yeah, you can go to the next slide. We're just going to talk about kind of some high level. What do we do? What's our purpose here? You know, originally when I started working with Power BI, I was just so excited that I could build all of these charts, right? So this was me. I thought, well, here's the data that I have, and now I'm going to make it pretty. You know, I kind of got a rough idea. Okay, I'm looking at some time data. I'll probably do a line chart. That's not exactly the way to go. Shannon, click next for me. Yeah, see, that's a no. All right, the next one, let's really think about what is the purpose of these reports, right? The purpose is that somebody needs to make a decision, most likely. That's generally what we're doing with our reports and dashboards. We're getting information so that we can make the right decisions, right? So then we as designers, how do we provide the information in the best way to be able to enable people to make these decisions without an overload, you know, on their brain processing time or confusion or, you know, even worse, getting the wrong information. So what's the best way to do this? Let's go to the next slide. First of all, we need to kind of high level think about a few things. We need to think about the source data. Do we have the data we need? We might have it all. If not, you know, we got to go and find some more data. We have to be making sure that we're talking to all the right people, the stakeholders and the users. We can't just kind of talk to one person and assume that they have all the perspectives for what the output of the report should look like. So we need to keep in mind the questions that need to be answered and the decisions that need to be made. This has to be kind of forefront of our minds always. It's not just, okay, let me throw a table on a page and let the users figure out what they need. No, they need to be able to answer their questions quickly and make their decisions. So let's go into a little bit more of this. Let's talk about these end users and these all the stakeholders actually, right? So we have executive sponsors. Without having your executive sponsors, maybe the C-level execs who can provide the funding and support, you're not even going to have a project, right? So you have to get support from executive sponsors. You'll also need to talk to business unit leaders, department heads who can identify the key requirements and encourage user adoption. This is another key component of why are only 15% of these reports being used. They might be awesome reports. They might have all the answers. Maybe people don't know about them. So a lot of this is going to be kind of a people process. You're going to need to, unfortunately, not, hide back in the closet like I used to do and just make my report and hope everybody would use it. No, you're going to have to talk to people. You're also going to need subject matter experts. Some of the logic you're going to need for your calculations is going to be pretty complicated. So you need to be able to talk to people who have in-depth knowledge of both the data and the processes. And then finally, your end users. And there's probably going to be different groups of end users, right? You might have like the execs who just want something kind of high level, but then you're also going to have some analysts who are going to need more detail. So you're really going to have to talk to a lot of people. Let me rephrase that. You're going to get to talk to a lot of people. You're going to make some friends, right? So these are the people you need to talk to. Shannon, next slide, please. Yeah, so then you'll need to start putting together some documentation, right? And there are lots of different types of documentation. This is just sort of a sampling. And who doesn't love acronyms? I don't, actually.
This slide scares me a little, I have to be honest.
This slide is what?
It's a little scary.
Yeah, definitely. And depending on your organization, you might have already a process in place for types of required documents that you need to fill out before you can even start this project. Or you might be in a smaller organization where you don't have any of these. You don't have templates. So it really depends on your organization and their standards. It just depends on what you may or may not need. But either way, you will need to gather requirements, and it will be a very good idea to write these requirements down. We're not going to go through the details of all these types of requirements, but it's just kind of to get these ideas out there. You can look this up. You can get ideas for what you might put in these different types of documents, but you'll need some kind of a business requirements document.
Stephanie, we have a question in the chat from Emmanuel who's asking, how often will you report to stakeholders?
That's a great question. And, it depends. It depends on your organization and your process. And like Shannon mentioned, this really is going to be iterative. It's not likely that you're going to get all the answers you need from the stakeholders up front and you're never going to have another question. It's also not likely that you will be able to design a perfect report the first time. You're going to be going back and forth. So it really depends on you, your organization, and your processes.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So here's some examples of types of requirements. We've got functional and non-functional. So functional requirements could be, what needs to be in the semantic model, what data, what are the metrics that you need to calculate? How do people need to get this data delivered to them? Non-functional could be performance, usability, scalability. So for example, maybe you have a functional requirement that you have to include a metric for, sales year over year. So then I take that information, I go and I write some terrible DAX, and I can give you the right answer, but it's going to take 30 seconds to load. Nobody's going to like that report. So that's an example of the non-functional requirement, which is that you need to determine through conversations with your stakeholders, how long can this take to load? So that's that kind of example. So these are the types of questions that you're going to ask, the information you're going to need to know. So finally, when I was doing some research on this was actually my very favorite blog post. Kurt Buehler at Data Goblins put this fantastic post together. I highly recommend it. He gives some good examples of these types of requirements gathering. It could be lift and shift. You might have a report already that's in Excel and somebody says, I want this in Power BI. You can make it look exactly the same, but you're really going to miss out on some opportunities. 2, you can just write a straight requirements document. That's got some challenges too, because people don't always know what they want up front. You've got to assume this iterative process. And then 3, finally, this is where you want to end up, co-creation workshops. So definitely check this post out. It's really helpful.
Thank you,
and
Stephanie.
I think that's it for gathering requirements for now. Just make sure that you do it. Make sure that you talk to stakeholders. Don't assume that you know what everybody needs up front.
Thank you. Excellent. All right. So after we gather our requirements, we have to model our data. Next step. This is a piece of the puzzle that is a part of your overall dashboard design process. It may not be something you yourself is doing. You yourself? Yeah, that makes sense. It might not be something you're doing, but it is essential to building reports that are useful and will be used to make decisions. I'm actually just noticing we have some interesting animation on the next slide, so I'm going to try to skip through it. Okay, so what is a data model? We're gonna fly through this. This presentation is not about data modeling, but this is critical to making sure that your Power BI dashboards and reports function optimally and give your users what they need. Okay, so you can think of a data model like a blueprint for a house. You wouldn't build a house without a plan, right? So we aren't going to build reports and dashboards without a solid foundation. So you've got your disparate tables, or perhaps they're linked. You're going to model them into what we call a star schema, which Stephanie's going to show us what that looks like in Power BI. And then the end product here is our beautiful report that our end users are going to use. Why does this matter? Why does the star schema matter? It matters for a few different reasons: for performance, for usability, and also for scalability. And this, oh, I was trying to get the GIF to play there. What I'm trying to show you here is that oftentimes if you build reports that are not performant, what that looks like is potentially, you see this table at the bottom here and it looks blank? Well, the data really is actually loading, but it's just taking a long time to populate. That's what we're talking about when we talk about this type of performance in Power BI. Usability and scalability are also incredibly important. Everyone's data is going to grow. We always know that. So if you start with small data, you can build a beautiful report with a big, wide, flat table, something that looks like this. You can build a great report off of that. However, as your data continues to grow, you may notice implications of the performance of your report. Calculations may be rendering slowly. And so that is why this specific tool, Power BI, works best when you take your big flat table and you model it into something called a star schema. Within your star schema, this is your dimensional data model. You have two types of tables. You have your fact tables. This is observations or events, usually numbers. And those are accompanied by, or really expanded on, by your dimension tables. This is your who, what, when, where, how, why. So this tells you all the details you need to know about the information. So in your fact table, you don't need to have the city abbreviation, the name of the city, the zip code, the every single thing about it. That you would put in a dimension table, whereas you would put perhaps the revenue for that city in the fact table. So fact tables support summarization in Power BI, and dimension tables support filtering and grouping. Within your dimensional data model, you're going to have what we just mentioned, your fact and dimension tables, additionally your relationships and measures. And then on top of that, to get to our beautiful report that we're about to talk about, you're going to have your calculated columns and measures, your calculated columns, your hierarchies, perspectives, calculation groups, all the things you put on top of that. We've got some general modeling recommendations here. Stephanie and I really like to think about decluttering your model to make it work optimally. We're not going to talk through all of these, but we recommend you take these away from today, and then we can continue this conversation on social media. So Stephanie is going to take us into a quick demo of modeling in Power BI. Stephanie, do you want to share your screen and take it away?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. Let me know. Can you see my screen now?
We can see it. Yep.
Okay, super. All right, so we don't have a ton of time for this. And like Shannon said, this presentation is not about modeling, but I told her, I got her approval because it's such an important topic. What I'm hoping is if you're not comfortable with modeling at this point, you will go out and maybe take another data camp webinar on modeling, because it's just such an important topic to make sure that your reports perform optimally. So I just want to show you an example here. This is an example of a model. And it doesn't exactly look like a star, but you can see that we have our sales in the middle, and we have our relationships to a bunch of tables around it, because these are our dimension tables. And one thing to note is I have a date table here, and you can see that this date table actually has 3 relationships to the fact table. This allows us to do things like calculations against different dates on the same chart that we cannot even do in a single wide flat table. So to show you that, I have this one right here, this chart, which has sales amount and sales amount by due date. I have another version of this model, which is right here. And this visual is broken because this is just a single, sorry, wrong view, a single flat table. It is actually impossible for me to be able to make that measure and put those two things on the same chart. So although, it's easy for us to just do the big flat table, it actually is very, very limiting. Did you have a question, Shannon?
I do have a question. So you mentioned that you have a broken measure. How easy is DAX, which is what we use to create measures? How easy is DAX when you have one big flat table as opposed to a dimensional model?
Well, to me, DAX is never easy. I always have challenges with it. Like I said, there are some things that are literally impossible to do if you have a big flat table. Um, and DAX will be much, much easier if you have your dimensional model.
Great.
Now, super quick, I wanted to show, this isn't a huge model. And so performance likely isn't going to take a big hit. I'm not going to have too many problems because I don't have that much data. But scalability, if you have, millions, billions of rows, it's going to be even more important for your modeling. And one thing I wanted to show, this is just a quick video. I recorded this, so let's see if I can make it run. Okay, so I can see here I have a model here, which is 1.4 gigs. Now, if I have a Power BI Pro license, I can't even publish that. I have a 1 gig maximum. So I would not even be able to publish this report to Power BI to share it with people. So what can I do about that? Well, I need to make it smaller, right? This is the same report. And I can see in here in the table view for my big table, which has 27 million rows, I have a start date column that has a date and a time. Same with end. This is going to take up a lot of memory in my model. I also have a trip ID that's unique for all 27 million rows. Because of that high cardinality, it's going to take up a lot of room. So I've got additional columns where I've separated out the date and time into different columns. That's going to immediately have less cardinality or less unique values in that column. So what I'm going to do, because I've made those columns where I separate out the start date and time, I'm just going to get rid of these columns. This is my Marie Kondoing. These columns do
Okay.
not bring me joy. I'm going to delete them from my model. So I'm deleting that combined date time column for the start and end date. I'm also going to delete that trip ID because I'm not using it in my visual. So there's no need for me to have it in my model. And so I'll delete that. All I just did was delete 3 columns. So then I go ahead and I save this model now with those 3 columns gone. And it's going to take a couple seconds to save. But remember, before when I had those 3 unused big columns, my model was 1 point almost 5 gigs. So impossible as a pro user to publish. Now, after saving it, it's down to 500 megabytes. So
Wow.
point here is just, you do not want to pull in things that you don't need. It will affect performance and scalability. So definitely scrap huge things. Make sure that you simplify your model. That's the real point of this one.
Okay, I am impressed by your Marie Kondoing. That is really incredible. And I think it's a really good demonstration of why modeling is a part of this report design process. So thank you so much, Steph. We do have one question in the chat from Leonardo who's asking, why is a measure considered a main element? You need the tables, model, and relationship to start creating them. So I'm actually going to jump back to the slide where we had the main elements versus the additional elements just so that we can speak to this. Stephanie, can you respond to this question? Why is a measure
Yes.
considered a main element?
Okay, so right, you can make a report where you actually don't define measures. Those are called implicit measures. So if you pull a numeric field onto a Power BI table, it will just try to add it. Maybe the default is to sum. That's actually not one of our best practices. Generally, it's considered better to create all of your calculations that you're going to be using explicitly. So that's called an explicit measure. So that's why I said that this is a really key component because most of what you're going to be showing in a Power BI dashboard or report is going to be, aggregations. So you want to make sure you get in that habit of creating those aggregations yourself. Otherwise, it's possible someone might pull in an ID field and it's going to summon and it's not going to make any sense. So you want to avoid that. I hope that answered it.
Incredible explanation. Thank you. That was excellent. Appreciate that. All right. So we now are all data modeling experts. Is that right?
Definitely. We're done.
Okay. And you may notice that your strengths lean towards one side or the other. We probably have people on this call who are incredible UX, UI designers, and they're really interested in the report design piece. Whereas I see some other folks in the chat who I know are brilliant data minds and who probably are really, really great at the dimensional modeling and pulling in data from different sources and all of that. So one person does not have to do all of this. That's the beauty of working on a team. And if you work at a smaller organization, you may be the Power BI unicorn who's great at it all. Now let's jump into the thing that I love the most, and I have really been focusing over the last couple years on getting better at, and that is applying design principles and creating visuals that are useful and that help our decision makers make the right decision. We're going to do a little exercise here. So I would love for everyone to participate, and you can either type the answer into the chat or just say it out loud, whatever you need to do. But we're going to do a little exercise here to talk about pre-attention, which is how your brain processes things before you even know it. So I'd like to know how many sixes are there in this visual? How many sixes are there on the screen? Let me give you just a couple seconds to count. Time's up, Stephanie. How many you got?
I think maybe 11. So I'm not sure.
Okay. So if we look at them slightly differently, it's easy to see that there's 6 here in this first row, there's 4 in the second row, and there's 3 in the third row. Okay, so that helps us understand the bolding helps us a little bit. Let's do something a tiny bit different. And this time, instead of using bold, we're going to use color. So Stephanie, you've got 10 seconds. Can you count the 4s?
Okay, I'm under pressure. 1, 2, 3, 4.
And this happens in your brain in like 500
8.
milliseconds. This happens quickly.
I'm thinking maybe 8 4s, but it took me a while. Okay.
Now how many 4s
Well, there are 2 right there. 2. Okay, I got it right, but much faster with the red. So yeah, this is huge. My brain really didn't have to do a lot of processing for that. Thank you for making it easier on me.
All right, so this is just a brief example. Thank you, Stephanie. Sorry to put you on the spot there. This is just a brief example of how we can use color as what is called a pre-attentive attribute to draw our user's eye to one thing. Okay, so there are other pre-attentive attributes. We're not going to go through all of these, but just be cognizant when you are building your report of how you can draw your user's eyes to the things that they need to be looking at. What is it that you're trying to show them, tell them, help them make a decision about? We also base all of the work that we do when we are designing visuals around the Gestalt theory. And this just emphasizes how your brain organizes elements into meaningful patterns. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these one by one, but you want to keep these items in mind as you're building. And that's why sometimes when I build Power BI reports or dashboards, I make sure that all of my elements on the page, whether it is a table or a chart or a title, everything has a nice little background. And everything that goes together perhaps has the same background around it. So I'm using these Gestalt principles. In this case, it's enclosure or proximity, perhaps, to make sure that my user's eyes are drawn where I want them. So we're now going to go through some data viz best practices. And this is like, again, it goes along with our overall requirements gathering process in a lot of ways, and you'll see that as we go through. So we're going to go through each of these principles one by one, starting with understand the context. So the first thing that is really important to note is that we as data practitioners are not always subject matter experts. Sometimes we are, and we sit in the business unit. For example, my expertise is in public health. And when I worked at a nonprofit in public health, I knew exactly what data I was working with. However, now I work at a big corporation, and sometimes I have to look at finance data or at operational data, and I have no idea truly what any of that is. So the key here is that we need to work with subject matter experts to understand what's the problem, what are the questions we need to identify, and this is a part of the requirements gathering. Here's a nice example where you need to think about who is your audience. Okay, so going back to thinking about, let's say I am a subject matter expert in some kind of a science, but I actually want to provide information for the board so that they can know how many studies do we need to fund and how effective is our work. Okay, well, by adding a couple of really quick and easy elements to our chart, we can add more context and we can help people understand what to look at. So it looks like something happened in 2013. And oh, guess what? We introduced a new policy, and that is why we have this huge increase in the number of studies.
I'm going to pause
Okay,
here because, like you said earlier, managers spend 40% of their time hunting down data. Right. So if I'm looking at this, I can see there was a big jump in 2013, but I don't know why. So now I got to go figure it out. That's an example of that. Sorry to interrupt because we are a little behind our schedule. So chop, chop.
I love that. And I will just add, a lot of this narrative information that you may need to add, you can use measures to create them. You can use the smart narrative to create them. And you can also use Copilot to create them. So as users navigate around your report and sort and filter and do all the things they need to do, the text will update and give them the information they need to know using natural language. Okay, the next thing that we are not going to go too far into here is choosing the right visual. And it's just really important if you're looking at data over time, perhaps a pie chart is not the best example. Our friends over at Zebra BI have a really nice chart selector. You can find this in the resources, and we encourage you to just go through it and make sure you're using the best choice. The next element we want to talk about is eliminating clutter. So this is an actual picture of Stephanie's teenager's bedroom. Just kidding.
It's not far.
But we want to make sure we are eliminating clutter in our visualizations. So I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like. Here we have a visual. This is from Cole Knaflick on her website, Storytelling with Data. And here we are looking at the time of birth date by week. There is a lot going on in this chart. I'm not even exactly sure what I'm supposed to take away from this. It's unclear to me. And if we do just a little bit of work focusing on that one of those first pre-attentive attributes we looked at, which was color, and we add a little bit of context, you can see that there is an actual takeaway from this visual. And I feel like this adding the context, eliminating the clutter is something that we have a lot of room to improve on in Power BI. We also need to make sure we are focusing attention. Okay, this was our first exercise, guiding the reader's eye by using color wisely, by using text intentionally, and by actually using text. So an example of this here, we have another visual, and these are from Excel, you can see, but we're going to do an example of Power BI in just a second here. So to focus attention here, this chart is trying to understand how do people get their news. Okay, it looks like the predominant, this is older data, and I'm sure this is a lot different now, but it used to be mostly via television. However, looking at the data over time, using color and eliminating clutter, we can see that an increasing proportion of people are using the internet as their primary news source. It is just so much more clear. Okay, and most importantly, accessibility is something that Stephanie and I are both incredibly passionate about, and we need to make sure we are building reports that every person can use. Okay, some of this perhaps for our neurodivergent users, eliminating clutter and using color wisely will be a big help. Okay, for folks that have color blindness, we may need to build reports that are color vision friendly. Okay, there are built-in themes in Power BI that you can use that will help you build reports that everyone can see. That way, red and green don't look exactly the same to someone who cannot see them effectively. All right, so here's a quick list of pitfalls. We talked about all of these previously, but what I'd like to do is talk about what this really means for Power BI, because that's why we're all here, I believe. All right, so in Power BI, I'd love to know, and you can type it in the chat or not, but how many people can spot a Power BI report immediately when you see it? You know this was built in Power BI as opposed to Excel or Tableau or any other tool.
Yeah, there are so many
Okay, it has a
defaults.
distinct
Yeah, right. And we usually all use those defaults.
We do, and perhaps we should not. Okay, so when we're using core visuals in Power BI, really focus on the formatting options that you have. Now, there are a million in there. Do you need to tinker around with every single option? Absolutely not. Remember our principles, keep it simple, use color effectively. That's probably the most important piece. And then focus on those other pre-attentive attributes like grouping things or positioning things in different places on the screen. The other key to Power BI is that it is incredibly interactive. Okay, so make sure that you are optimizing that interactivity and going back to your requirements gathering, that you're working with your users on what it is they want to see. When they select a bar on the chart, do they want the table to filter, or do they just want the data they need to see that's related to that bar to be highlighted? Okay, so work with your users there on the interactivity, and then finally iterate, and refine. Someone mentioned in the chat earlier, I think it was Gina, that often your V1 people don't like, but at least you have something for them to respond to, and then you continue to iterate. We also have the ability, and I mentioned this earlier, to customize our report themes. This is really, really helpful when it comes to making all the reports in your organization look the same, making sure that all of the reports in your organization are accessible. And so you can customize report themes, and you can then ensure that everyone in your organization is using the same theme. So this gives you a little bit of control. Okay, very quickly, I've built a demo that I'm going to jump over to, and you can access this report via the link in the slide. But I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about real quickly here.
Oh, that's a
So
Power BI
here we
report.
have, yeah, can you tell? Excuse me. So here we have an out-of-the-box Power BI report. You know the minute you look at this, what it is you're looking at. Okay, this is a table, and I'm looking at sales of a store by category, and I want to know, like, what are the most profitable items, right? Okay, this table, I have to spend a couple of minutes to look at, okay, maybe whatever this is, envelopes isn't doing very well. Maybe machines aren't doing very well, but it's just not that helpful. Okay. In Power BI, we have the ability to take that table that you can clearly tell that was built in Power BI and turn it into something that looks like this. Okay. Does this take time? Yes, it does. However, how can we see, I mean, what has the biggest change in profit from 2020 to 2021?
It's like the forest,
we
right?
can
It pops
see
right out at us.
exactly. Okay, so here I used a combination of different strategies. So I used conditional formatting like this, which is built into the tool. Okay, and then I also used SVG measures, which we will provide some resources for how you can find those to create these icons, for example. But the key here is that this is not as useful to me as this.
Shannon, quick question. Why do you have blue and orange there?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you. So When I mentioned earlier about building accessible reports, for folks that have red-green color vision deficiency, red and green actually look the same. Okay, so I have switched up in my brain, and I hope that people get this opportunity as well. Rather than using the stoplight colors, I use orange and blue. And I know I've used a color vision simulator to figure out what things look like. Orange and blue work really well for great and not great, as opposed to red and green. All right, one more quick example, and then I need to hand it back over to Steph to talk about a really important piece. But here we are looking at, again, you can tell right off the bat, this is Power BI. It is so easy to tell. It's just a bar chart. We're looking at the cost of protein. And you know, a lot of Americans right now are really concerned about the cost of groceries. So here we can see that if we're trying to mind our budget, perhaps canned chicken is not the best option, okay? However, this doesn't tell us the full story. Maybe we want to know what the average cost is so that we can try to purchase things that are below the average price. So here, using Power BI, I've done a little bit of extra work, and I have made sure that what's the first thing that jumps out to me is I've got an average line here. Okay, we can see that the average for 20 grams of protein is $1.36. So all of these items, from protein powder all the way to actually chicken legs, okay, is below the average. So this is just another example of how we can use color and we can focus readers' attention very easily in our beloved Power BI. Actually, I'm going to pause there. Any questions or comments?
We did have one question from Gina, which was, in your example with the line where you noted that, there was a policy change in 2013, she wanted to know, how do you combat but what if the data changes tension of adding explanatory text to reports that refresh?
That is a great question. I am going to respond to this, but then Steph, I'd love to hear what you have to say as well. The way I would go about this is I would probably use a measure to create that text so that when the data updates, the report is refreshed, or when folks are navigating around to different bits of the report, that block of text is dynamic and it changes as the user is navigating around the report or as the data updates. Steph, how would you handle that?
I think exactly the same. I mean, I will always default to try to make things dynamic because I am a little lazy. So I want to do less work. However, efficient, not lazy, right? However, it depends. I think, not all reports have the same purpose. Some are going to be more static, like an infographic. Maybe they're not going to be all that interactive. In that case, putting static text on there is just fine. But yeah, if it is a more interactive report, I'm going to just do my best to try to make it dynamic.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thanks for that question. All right, we are now going to jump into our report monitoring and iteration, and Stephanie's going to talk to us about why we need to do this and how we do it. So Stephanie, take it away.
Yes, next slide, please. Thank you, Shannon. Okay, so yeah, why do we want to monitor? We know that we've done all of our gathering requirements and we have made some beautiful reports and we got sign off from our users. My job's done, right? Probably not, right? So we need to monitor because, yeah, we want to measure impact, right? I would like a bonus. I would like, people to know that, hey, I made this report and now all these people are using it. So that's great. That's just one example of measuring impact. Enhancing the user experience, just because we've done all the requirements, we don't necessarily know for sure that we got everything that people needed. Driving adoption, we don't want to build something that people don't use. And we are going to be continually improving it. We also need to justify the investments. There are so many reasons to monitor. But to me, the main one is just we don't always know what is going to happen. Once we feel like we have made our complete perfect report, it's probably not. We're going to have to iterate. So those are some big reasons for the why. Next slide. Okay, so what should we monitor? We should definitely monitor usage patterns. We need to know who is using our reports. Which reports, the usage, how has it looked over time? Maybe people used it a bunch in the beginning because it was new, but then usage dropped off. I might want to find out why. And which pages on the reports are people using? Maybe I've made 10 pages, but people are only using one. Either they don't need it or it's just not meeting their needs in an effective way. And are people exporting to Excel frequently? If they are, why? Because as soon as they do, they've disconnected from the data. They've got static data now. Um, I always do my very, very best to try to meet people's needs without having them need to export to Excel to do further analysis, for example. Um, and also feedback. I would say consider adding a button to your report to allow users to provide feedback. You can make a simple forms form, Microsoft Forms, link to that with a button on your report and let people tell you. They might not always do it, but it's great information if you can get it. Okay, performance. How much time do report visuals take to load? This is key. Maybe it's giving people the numbers they need, but it's too slow. They're just not going to use it. They're going to abandon it. And how much time does your semantic model refresh take? Is that acceptable? Does it need to be sped up? This is really important. Finally, security. Do the right people have access to the various layers, the workspace, the model, and the reports? Do you need to be using sensitivity labels? Do you have very sensitive data that you don't want exported? These are all important things to make sure you're watching. So next slide
Awesome.
is, how do we do it?
I'd be really curious to know how many folks that are on the call already monitor these things. And if you do, how do you do it? I'd love to know.
Okay, so how can we do it? Well, we can check the usage report, which I'm going to show you in the demo. There's also workspace monitoring. There are the audit logs. These are kind of a pain. You have to be a global admin to be able to get to these. But there is a newish admin monitoring workspace. You do have to be a tenant admin right now to be able to access that, but your tenant admin can share the reports with you. So you either have to be the admin or you have to be friends with the admin. Again, feedback. How do you do it? You just make a forms form and make a link, just get into that habit. If we want to monitor performance, we can use, I actually didn't put this bullet point on here, but I'm going to show it in the demo, which is the performance analyzer in Power BI Desktop. And then there's also log analytics and workspace monitoring. This is kind of next level. We're not going to go into that today. But if you were the admin for your tenant, this is something you'd be keeping an eye on. Also the capacity metrics app. And then for security, you'll be doing that in the service. Okay, next slide is the demo. Okay, so we're just like a minute or two behind, so we're doing all right. What's that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So I was just mentioning you're going to take us through a demo and you're going to share your screen.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so let me just get the right screen up here and then let me know when you can see my screen.
You can see it.
So I am in the Power BI service here. So I'm in a workspace. A workspace is, where we publish our reports and models and everything too. This is where we're doing our building of what we're building. That was redundant. So if I want to
I hear
see
you.
who is using these reports, right? So I've got this workspace filtered down to just reports, and I see I've got a number of them in here. And I would like to check out, I've just done all my requirements gathering. I built this awesome report called Power BI for call centers. I want to know, is anybody using it? So I can click the three dots next to the report and I can go to view usage metrics. Now, the first time you do this, it's going to take longer to load. I've already done this before, so that's why it popped right up. This report's been around for a while. It keeps the data for 30 days. So you'll want to keep an eye on this report. On the first page, you'll be able to see how many people have opened it in the last 30 days, how many times it was opened, and how many people. And down here on the right, let's see if I can make, whoop, I'm less good with Zoom it than Shannon is. But down here on the right, I can actually see the names of the people that are using my report and how often. Not only that, but I can click on the pages and I can see which pages they're looking at. This is going to answer that question of what pages are the most useful to people. So now I know who to talk to. If I see that, the usage has dropped off, I can say, Shannon, why are you not using my report anymore? What would make this report better? I can also click on report performance, which is going to show me a typical opening time for the report, so I know if it's really slow or not. And then this report I can compare against the other reports in my workspace to see which reports are getting the most usage. So this is a pretty handy thing. When you look at this report, it is report by report. However, you can explore this data and here's the semantic model for that. So if I wanted to look at this data in a different way than the report is showing me, I can make my own view of it. Okay, you can actually also access this data from Power BI Desktop and make your own. So this is kind of the basic one, but this is, again, one report in one workspace.
Can I pause
Yes,
you?
please.
We've got a very relevant question in the chat. Leonardo's asking, is this the one you mentioned that you need to be a demigod admin to access it?
No, this is not. Good question, right. So if I have edit access or if I can edit in a workspace, then I can look at this report. So as long as I am someone who is, I think, a contributor or above in the workspace, I can look at this report. Yep. Okay. So no, you do not need to be a demigod for this one. To be the demigod report, that's in this special workspace called admin monitoring. So this is, where you're going to want to make friends. There's a report in here called feature usage and adoption. I'm just going to quickly click on it to show you that this one, there are a few pages in here. There's a help section. So, get into this, look at the help. There's a bunch of good documentation on it. But you can do some analysis to see, which reports are being used the most, for example. There's filters, so I can filter this down to reports. It's got a bunch of other objects in here too. But I can see, here's the view report. This is very interactive. I can change which fields are down here. I can also see an inventory of my objects in Power BI/Fabric and see which things are considered active and inactive. So this could be a quick way to see a bunch of reports that are considered inactive, meaning they're just not getting a lot of usage, and maybe you can clean house, declutter a little bit with those. All right, so that's monitoring who's using things, right? There's another thing you should monitor, which is performance. Maybe Shannon is going to tell me, yeah, I like that report, but I go to this page, it's really important. I have to go get a cup of coffee while I wait for it to load every time. So now I'm the developer, I got to figure out why. So now I'm going to look in desktop really quickly. And I want to just quick mention this performance analyzer. So you can go into the view tab and click performance analyzer, and this is going to monitor your report. You want to make sure that you haven't gone to a page and looked at it before you start recording because it caches. So that's why I'm on a blank page here. But what I can do is I can click start recording. Now I'm going to go to this page that I know is pretty slow because Shannon told me that, when I go to this page, it takes a while to open. And I'd really like to drill way down and see, down to the day, how many things or, how many rides there are between stations. So I'm interacting, and you can see as I'm doing it, it is monitoring every change as I'm clicking on things. And this last one, this takes a while. Yeah, so now I can see, okay, I know Shannon's my top user and she's really struggling with this report. So really quickly, this is more effective than I expected, 13 seconds. So now I can open this up and I can see that the DAX query took the longest here. So it's not easy to troubleshoot, but I can get this DAX and see what's going on. I can click this run in DAX query view, and it pops the DAX for that visual into a page. Now this is, a little painful, but it's showing me exactly what Power BI is doing and why it's slow. Optimizing your DAX is a completely different topic, but this is the method for how you would go ahead and do that. I think I'm a little over. So those are the key things I wanted to get you started with for monitoring. There are more places to look for monitoring. For example, there's the capacity metrics app if you're a tenant admin. And we're not going to get into that today, but there are other places that you can also do a little bit more monitoring. But these are a good start. You can look at your report usage and you can look at this performance monitor. And with that, that's the end of this demo. So if you want to go back to the slides, Shannon.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was super helpful. And if there's anyone on the call that has not yet done this monitoring and you were wondering how, I hope that this gave you an idea of how it would be useful to you, and then how you can actually do it. So with that, that brings us to the end of the presentation. And we have now talked through what we consider to be the whole process for designing effective dashboards and reports. So we start with our requirements gathering, we model our data, or we work with someone to model our data. We apply these good design principles. We keep things super simple, and then we monitor and iterate as Stephanie just showed us. So Reese has mentioned a couple times in the chat, but we have all of the resources that we've talked about today are linked in the deck. And we have a couple minutes now for Q&A. There was one question in the chat that we did not get to, and that was a question about how do you create that dynamic text to put it onto a screen so that as the data updates, the text that you're annotating a chart with updates. And the way you're going to do that is by using DAX. And I believe, and maybe Stephanie, you can jump in here, but if you search for dynamic measures, you'll find lots of good resources on how to make sure that those update quickly.
Yeah, you'll definitely go down a rabbit hole like I have many times. There are a lot of great blogs out there to help you with that. And I also noticed we had, let's see, Matt mentioned the third-party tool Measure Killer to help you optimize reports by finding unused measures, columns, things like that. Yes, that's a fantastic tool. I did not mention today, but there's also something in Fabric called Semantic Link, where if you are a Python person, you can do all of this kind of looking for unused things as well. So there are lots of great tools out there for this.
I've got to say that was amazing stuff, and it's very good that you've been doing your own Q&A as well. It makes life a lot easier for me. Actually, I had a question for you. So you mentioned that when you're creating dashboards, you don't want to use the defaults. Now I feel like I want to do like kind of best practices, make stuff look pretty every time. I want my colleagues to do this as well, but also I don't want to put a lot of effort into this. Is there a way of changing like the default, having like a corporate theme that you can just set once and say all our plots will look pretty like this?
Yes, there absolutely is. So we have some friends over at powerbi.tips. So if folks want to run over to their website, they have what they call a theme builder. And essentially what you can do this in many different ways, but powerbi.tips has great resources. You can go into their theme builder on their website and you can specify font sizes, colors, defaults for different kinds of visuals, all those things. And you click a button and it's entirely free. When you click that button, it'll spit out a JSON report, and you then use that JSON report across your organization in your reports so that they have everything you just mentioned, Richie. So yes, you can customize your themes. We've got friends that have tools that can help you customize those. You can do some of that customizing in Power BI Desktop, but you're going to have better luck with tons of customization if you either edit the JSON or use a tool like Power BI.tips theme generator.
Okay, that sounds very cool. Just what I wanted. Wonderful. All right. So yeah, do you have any final advice then on like what to do here? I know you've given like an hour of different tips, so a lot of things to consider. I guess what's your number one tip then for having more impactful reports and dashboards?
I think mine is going to be
Stephanie,
monitoring. Yeah,
Monitoring.
definitely. Yeah, because you feel like your job is done once you've built something and published it. But like you said in the beginning, Richie, maybe nobody's using it. Maybe it's just going to take one little change to make it more usable for people. So it's definitely worth keeping in mind that this is you're never done. It's iterative.
All right, super. In that case, maybe we need a follow-up session on monitoring then. Yeah, how to track your usage. Wonderful. Actually, I think there's a few Dave Framed episodes around that, so please do check out the podcast as well. All right, wonderful. So we're going to wrap up before you all dash off and say next week is AI assisted Python week. So we've got 3 code alongs for you on how to get started writing Python code. Well, actually, without having to write the Python code yourself, getting AI to do it for you. So please do come back for that. There's also a session on Monday for anyone who's a teacher in the audience, talking about how you can make use of data camp classrooms. Yeah, so hope to see you all again in future sessions. So yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Absolutely jam-packed with tips. I very, very much enjoyed today's session. And yeah, thank you, Reese, for moderating. Thank you to everyone who asked a question. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. See you all again soon.